Hello, all. Welcome thank you so much for being here and welcome. You are in the right place if you're here for our 2023 Environmental and Reproductive Health film and webinar series. Just a little bit of housekeeping. If you have any tech issues, you can chat with Fabiola, who is the frog icon. Hopefully you're seeing that. And yeah, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So everyone is muted. So as not to be distracting. And I will say that you can turn on closed captions and pick your preferred language for those captions under the Zoom icon with the little CC and the colon. So we're pleased to be able to offer that. And I know everyone always has questions. Will it be recorded? Yes, it will be recorded. We will email you a copy next week. And information about continuing ed credits will be shared in our follow-up email, allowing you to submit a certificate to various credentialing bodies. So look for that from me also. And I'm going to start us off with a quick introduction before moderating our discussion with our three wonderful panelists. And then we plan to leave time at the end for open Q&A. So we really ask you to be putting your questions in the chat throughout. So give me 1 second here as I move my windows around. All right, and welcome to those of you that have been joining us. This is our third one. So it's great to see some names that have participated before. All right. So just a little bit about me. My name's Kelly Dennings. My pronouns are she and her. For those that are unable to see me today, I'm a short, white, middle-aged woman with brown hair standing in my office. I want to acknowledge that I'm on stolen Seminole, Timucua, and Muskogee land where many individuals face displacement and suffering and hope one day they receive restorative measures. I did spend 15 years working in waste, forestry, and conservation before getting a master's in public health. And I'm a campaigner with the Center for Biological Diversity, working to develop and execute campaigns that address these connections between reproductive health, gender equity, endless growth, and the climate and extinction crises. So just a little bit about me. All right, so before we get started, we're going to I'm going to have Fabiola open our first poll. So I know we have a small group today, but let us know if you are in environmental health and justice, climate change, public health and nursing, reproductive health and justice, alternative economies, waste, other, or not applicable. And you should be able to check all that apply. So we'll give you a minute or so to do that. What do you think, Fabiola? Should we close it? All right. I thought with this topic, we might have some folks in waste. So it definitely looks like that is our top place. But then we've got climate change and environmental health folks on the line too. So awesome. Thank you all. It's really helpful to know that so we can maybe formulate our remarks to be applicable to the work that you do. Oh, and let me just say, if you checked other or something like that, please take the survey, the evaluation at the end, and kind of let us know what category we're missing. Whoops. Oh my goodness, people, I am off today. So first, a quick introduction about the center. We're a national nonprofit conservation organization that works through a combination of science, the law, activism, and creative media to protect wildlife and the wild places they need to thrive. So on the screen, you're seeing all of our different programs. So again, to set the stage, environmental health refers to environmental factors and toxicants that create poor health outcomes for humans. This includes chemicals, pollution, and climate change. And reproductive justice, as defined by Sister Song, is the human right to maintain personal bodily autonomy, have children, not have children, and parent the children we have in safe and sustainable communities. Unfortunately, threats to environmental health are putting reproductive justice at risk. So our current economy is impacting reproductive health in many ways, through air, soil, and water pollution, climate change and extreme weather events, and the manufacturing of products with endocrine disrupting chemicals. So you can read all about this work in the report that we put out last year titled The Influence of Environmental Toxicity, Inequity and Capitalism on Reproductive Health. And I think Kim is going to be putting that report in the chat for us. So we definitely recommend that you take a look at that. And I just want to note that our discussion today aims to provide a brief introductory overview of the relationship between the environment, racial inequity, reproductive justice, and their connection to capitalism. It does not intend, nor is it able to cover the full range of issues relevant to these complex subjects. So, as the center continues to do research around this issue of market capitalism, it continues to be one of these oppressive systems harming people on the planet. But folks just really find it difficult to see beyond this system that is so ingrained in our lives. And we really want to change that. So we just conducted a new US public survey to get a sense of America's existing knowledge of alternative economy principles, their perceptions of the role corporations play in the economy, and their willingness to engage in community-level alternative economy actions. So you can read more about that in the report that we're putting in the chat right now. All right. So the goal of the film and webinar series was really to continue the learning that came out of last year's report and to motivate folks to be change agents. And today we're going to be talking about the harm associated with plastic products. So we have talked about industrial agriculture, and we are talking about climate change next week. So we just really are trying to leverage this report that we put out last year. So as I just mentioned, we hope you join us for our final webinar next week, where we're going to talk about climate change, families, and our endless growth economy. So if you're not signed up, Kim is putting a link to the final event in the chat. We would love to see you there. It's going to be a great panel. All right. So one more quick poll here before we go into the Q&A. This second poll is for those folks that do want continuing ed credit. So you don't have to click no if you don't want the credit, but if you do want continuing ed credit, click yes so that I know that you have attended. All right, hopefully that was enough time to get you to the poll. Thank you. All right. So I'm excited to bring today's film to you called We The Guinea Pigs, and hopefully everybody got a chance to watch it. For those who didn't get to watch the film, it's actually going to be open for 3 extra days until midnight Pacific on Sunday. So Kim is also dropping that into the chat. So hopefully folks were able to navigate our film festival technology. But if not, you have a few more days and you're welcome to chat with us to get better help in accessing it if you had any problems. But so this film really was about this inextricable increase in the number of diseases and disorders in people. And that was from breast cancer to low sperm quality. And it investigated plastic's potential involvement. So this was really one of the main films that brought to light the reproductive harm in particular to one of the topics that we had discussed in our report last year. So I was pleased to be able to bring it to you. It was more than just kind of health in general, health harms in general. So let me introduce our great list of panelists today. So first, and you guys are welcome to bring up your cameras. Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, so first we have Dr. Thalia Segal, who's the founder and medical director of Collab Fertility, which is going to be opening in January in Walnut Creek, California. Prior to this, she was an assistant professor at the University of California, San Francisco, and she has a special interest in how air pollution, environmental toxins, and pesticides impact fertility and IVF outcomes. She earned her medical degree at Albert Einstein College of Medicine, and she completed a residency in obstetrics and gynecology at Northwell Health, followed by a fellowship in reproductive endocrinology and infertility at University Hospitals Cleveland Medical Center. So thank you so much for being here. All right. Then we have Yvette Arellano. They are a Mexican-American Gulf Coast organizer based in Houston, Texas, home to 618 chemical manufacturers. They are the founder and director of Fenceline Watch, an environmental justice organization dedicated to the eradication of toxic multi-generational harm on fenceline communities. Yvette has testified before EPA, federal, state, and intergovernmental bodies about public health impacts from toxic exposure and potential solutions. Their advocacy focuses on protecting open and public processes, toxic exposure, community right to know, and chemical disasters fueled by expanding plastic production. So welcome. And then we have Swati Rayasam, is a science associate at the University of California, San Francisco, program on reproductive health and the environment. She's been one of the leads on the team for PRHE's work to ensure EPA's implementation of the Toxic Substances Control Act, and which protects the health of communities disproportionately impacted by toxic chemical pollution, such as BIPOC, low-income populations, incarcerated populations, and people with disabilities. She earned her Master's of Science in Global Health and the Environment from the University of California, Berkeley's School of Public Health, and a BS in Biology from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. So, welcome all. I am going to stop sharing now. And it is so wonderful to have you. Well, so what I wanted to start with, and this question is really open for anybody, is there was so much information, as I mentioned, in this film, particularly about reproductive health. So whoever wants to tell me, what were your reactions to the film, and what questions did it raise for you all?
The film touched on a very personal note. This is Yvette Arellano from Fenceline Watch, they, them pronouns. I'm wearing a gray shirt and have short hair, and I'm wearing glasses, and behind me I have a bookcase. My first reaction to the film was I watched it twice, and I shared a link with my cousin who just had a newborn baby girl. And it touched a very personal piece for me because I struggle with infertility and reproductive issues. I have hormone imbalances, and I found all this out from visiting my local Planned Parenthood that ran a blood panel and was able to show me what I'd been struggling with. It caused a lot of pain, a lot of disruption at work. I just couldn't function. And so to gain clarity on what it was that was affecting me was one, and seeing the film and finding myself in other people was very community building for me. So thank you for hosting this panel and having access to the film.
Thank you. Thank you. I do hope that it brought that sense of community, and even though it can be a little traumatizing. So thank you. Anyone else?
I feel like Thalia and I are like staring at each other. So hi. I'm Swati, again, she, her pronouns. I am a South Asian woman, short hair, in front of a virtual background of, I think it's the campus actually I work at UCSF, which is interesting, very foresty. But yeah, I think that my first reaction to the film was, well, I just like sent it to a number of my friends who have all been really engaged around toxic chemicals, and to family members as well. I think a lot of the work that we do at PRE and a lot of the work that I feel like I try to do with other scientists is to make sure that they fully realize that toxic chemicals are not these like highly specialty type topics that regular people can't understand, and that everyday people are invested, and pop culture is tapped into, corporate influence and plastic pollution and chemical pollution in a way that scientists aren't really supporting or empowering. And so I sent it to a bunch of folks. And yeah, I think it was just a lot of, reflection for me on the devastation that chemical pollution has caused on the health of so many folks, just a few of whom were featured in the film, and a few of whom, because the film was obviously in Europe and in Danish, that are predominantly white. So my first reaction was just around all the people who weren't featured in the film and all of the issues of chemical pollution that Yvette deals with all of the time, and that we all deal with all of the time, that were not featured in the stories that weren't featured there. And then a kind of sense of frustration, which I think we'll talk about later, around the lack of solutions and the way that a lot of these films are just so, I have no other word except for they are a massive bummer. Like, they are so disempowering, and they are so harmful sometimes in that way that they leave the audience without a feeling like they can do what they can do moving forward, or this idea that it's all unchangeable, that your conditions are unchangeable. So I know we'll talk about that later, but I think that was what I'm still kind of sitting with, is how do we continue to empower our people?
Yeah, exactly. Which was, kind of why I put together this panel, so that we can address some of those things that I didn't think were quite in the film, that we should still be talking about and addressing, and maybe talking about solutions. So yeah, Thalia, over to you. Thoughts?
Sure, yeah. So I'm Thalia Segal, she, her. I'm starting a new fertility practice in Walnut Creek. So we're in construction, hopefully opening January. But yeah, oh, and then I am white, brunette, sitting in my guest room with some paintings behind me. So in terms of impressions, I mean, it's like preaching to the choir, right? This is what I research day in, day out. So there was nothing new for me personally. I know for the world, it is definitely still news. Even in my family, my mom, even though I have tons of evidence and review articles to share with her, she doesn't really believe it. And I think there's a lot of people like that who are like, oh, but I had babies and I'm fine, and I don't have breast cancer yet, or, so I think there's still, it's good that they're making these films to show it, to raise awareness. And then hopefully people like my mom, I'm going to send her this film. I think it helps, because when you make it in this kind of dramatic movie, it helps to show the numbers and the data, and the PubMed is, doesn't have the same impact. And then I agree with Swati about the lack of solutions. What are people doing in terms of policy and lawmakers? And, yes, we're here now, but what can we do?
Yeah, I think y'all touched on a lot of things there. So I wanted to go back and start with you, Thalia, about so it really brought to light this idea of endocrine disrupting chemicals. And the center was fortunate to work with Nurses for Sexual and Reproductive Health last year. So when we did the report, they created a module for nurses, nursing students, and existing nurses that wanted continuing ed credits. And so it was a module all about the report, but they focused heavily on endocrine disrupting chemicals. So Can you just kind of give us a quick overview of that, and then tell us about your work and how it intersects with these topics?
Sure. So broad overview, endocrine disrupting chemicals, they're naturally or man-made chemicals. They can interfere at any time in the lifespan and generally act at receptors in our body that modulate hormone activity. So all of our endocrine glands are potential places where they can act, and then they lead to downstream DNA changes, phenotypic changes. These changes can persist generation to generation. So pregnant mom exposed, their child is born, and the grandchildren can still have these epigenetic changes persist. So a great example is DES. This is a synthetic estrogen. It was developed in the 40s for women. They thought, well, maybe if we give them estrogen, they won't have a miscarriage. And so they gave it to pregnant women. And then those daughters ended up having high risk for infertility, T-shaped uterus, vaginal cancers. And the grandchildren also continued to have those problems. So that is one of the classic EDC examples. And similarly, BPA, phthalates, when exposure occurs at these critical times like pregnancy, can have the same impact.
Yeah, I remember learning about that in my public health classes, this idea of epigenetics, and it's that intergenerational trauma and yeah, issues. It's hard to go backwards and figure that out. But all right, Yvette, over to you. So I did share, or you shared a little bit about this, but I chose the film because it really focused on the reproductive harms. And we've kind of touched around some of the things that were lacking in the film, but for me, it didn't really focus much on the impact of the whole life cycle of plastics and how it can impact communities upstream in the production. And so tell me about how you got involved in the work and how it intersects with reproductive health.
I got involved in environmental justice work through living life and being a part of a lot of struggles, migrant rights, mental health, food justice, education. And I was actually working at a Boys and Girls Club and preaching this whole, American dream situation that didn't really match up with what I was seeing. Children suffering from mental health issues, bipolar syndrome, asthma, all their medications just started piling up in our refrigerators where we had our staff lunches. And at the same time, Occupy Wall Street was going on. So all these different movements were sharing information, reproductive rights, access to healthcare. And I got involved in environmental justice, originally, wanting to fight the fossil fuel industry that was already polluting our communities, already making it hard to breathe, making it hard to sleep, because you just can't. You feel this weight on your chest, trying to bring some redress to the chemical disasters we were facing all along, thinking that this was completely normal for a community, that every community has multiple refineries, every community has to generate power. And when I started talking to other people, visiting other communities, I saw that that just wasn't true. So I started linking up things that had happened to me as just a young person, just seeing my mom get a hysterectomy, going to the doctor's offices, because I'm also first generation. And so I was translating so much of what the doctors were saying to my mom. And I think that's a pathway, especially for people, young people who serve as translators for their families, to understanding things that are too big to comprehend. for however old you are. And through advocating in environmental justice, I began to learn, like, these are the links. I had a really fortunate meeting with Ricky Yvette, who is a marine toxicologist, worked on the Exxon Valdez spill, and through Ricky Yvette learned about bioaccumulation and how it disproportionately affected women in our bodies because of fatty tissue, because women tend to be the people who shoulder domestic care in homes, people who come in contact with detergents and chemicals and cleaners and bleaches. And so we were going to face all these impacts. And so through that, through talking to folks in feminist economy who are really pushing for these impacts to be recognized, I started seeing myself in this work. And then with the revelation of the results coming from Planned Parenthood, definitely saw myself fully ingrained. And it's through that, through seeing just a legacy of non-men in the movement, that I not only recognized that there was missing information, but also that there was a gap that needed to be filled. And we needed to fill that. So my struggle in environmental justice is very personal. It's something that I see in my community when I talk to other women who have this barrier, right? In communities, it is not. Sexuality, reproductive systems isn't something that comes naturally, and it isn't something that is welcome. And it's that lack of conversation that creates the vulnerability for us to share those stories and then build on work and continue advocating and screaming at the top of our lungs that things need to change, that we need transparency, we need access to information, we need to break the ivory towers that have been holding so much information, not from communities, but inadvertently creating overly technical language that doesn't allow us on the ground level to participate in comment periods to try and stop the build out of the fossil fuel industry, which is exactly what we're feeling here in Houston. With over 600 facilities, fossil fuels has found a lifeline in plastic to continue growing and expanding those chemicals, including the additives that cause this kind of harm to our communities, because they see that the conversation and the narrative around the need to drive EV, the need to transform grid systems is happening. How else will they be able to sustain a stronghold in society? Well, by ingraining it, by turning those glass bottles into plastic bottles, by putting in intentionally added microplastics in our facial cleaners and cosmetics that we disproportionately use. So that, on top of the chemical disasters, on top of having to wake up at 3 and 4 in the morning because one of my neighbors has someone who works in the fossil fuel industry who's like, hey, an explosion just happened, and it's nowhere on the news. So it's that upstream piece that I come from, trying to tackle it from the beginning, trying to turn off that tap, because once those plastics are out there, they're out there. And the only thing you can do is manage them. From recent conversations, we know that recycling doesn't work. It's not the answer, or it can't be the only answer. And we really have to tackle this from every point in that plastics value chain, from the recycling angle, trying to stop that chemical recycling, from the waste end, trying to make sure it doesn't enter the environment, but also in the stores saying, hey, we don't want this plastic. Give us the glass that you had that Snapple drink in, you know? And then all the way to the Gulf Coast and areas that struggle with natural gas, coal, you know, oil, that continue feeding this process and keeping it alive.
Yeah, thanks. That is exactly kind of what I was thinking, is like the film addressed very specifically plastics, but it is like the community in which you live in with all the fossil fuels that a lot of people, I don't think, always know that that's the building block of your plastic bottle. And, you know, it is such an issue that they're trying to increase that production. And so thank you for that. You also mentioned something that really ties to me that I think might lean into my question for Swati too. But you talked about the economics around this. And there really is, we are trying in this series and in the report of linking this to our economy, right? This idea of an endless growth economy. And we talk about the just transition of our energy. But we really feel like there's this need for kind of a larger transition from industrial ag to more environmentally friendly agriculture. I was talking about it earlier today, when we need a retail transition, it was Main Street, local small Main Street, then it was big box stores, and now it's a large Amazon distribution center. There are going to be people that need to transition. And yeah, we would love to see kind of an economic justice lens and talk about that in this work too. So thank you. So Swati, at the end of the film, they talk about how industry is kind of critical of some of this research that had been outlined. And I know it had to have been hard for you to hear because you're very passionate about empowering scientists and academics and clinicians to affect change. So tell me about the work that you've been doing and how it intersects with the topics in the film.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, for me, how it made me feel was I continue to giggle because that is all I can do lest I begin to sob. But just to build kind of on Yvette's point really quickly, what they were saying around ivory tower creation and like wall building that has historically been done around toxic chemicals. I will push back in a totally reasoned way in that those things have actually been intentionally created and kept away from communities through this lack of belief that people on the ground or people who are experiencing the buildup of these chemical industries have nothing meaningful to contribute, or this presumption that scientists and clinicians and academics have a better idea of the larger picture. And I think time and again, that kind of proves to not be true. And, I think that we're in a place right now, I'm hoping that we're in a place as scientists right now to have these larger conversations like you're having here around connecting this belief of everlasting economic growth and production and capitalism into the science that we're dealing with in toxicology and environmental exposure to chemicals and an endocrine disruption. And I think a lot of science has historically suffered and not been as useful or impactful because it failed to have a really holistic consideration, because scientists failed to be able to do more than go beyond their future directions and their next grant for research, and didn't necessarily do research that was supportive of or impactful to communities who are facing an onslaught of chemical production manufacturing in their backyards, or who are kind of forced onto an increased reliance on these manufacturing jobs that are fundamentally harming their health, harming their environments, and not sustainable. But yeah, in terms of the work that PRE does, so for the past 4.5 years, I have been stewarding a network of 200 plus scientists, academics, and clinicians using their expertise to make meaningful policy change, specifically focused on TSCA, and also very clearly aligned with independent science. So one of the places where PRE is really at the forefront in academic spaces is around the issue of conflict of interest in the evidence base and in the research base, which was touched on a little bit in the film. At the very end, researchers that were doing all this work, these large cohort studies, were saying that they get a ton of comments, on their research from people who are affiliated with the chemical industry, or get a bunch of comments from folks looking to poke holes in research, which I think it's very important. Robin D.G. Kelly says that it's critical to levy critiques in order to actually like fight for our future and our liberation and for our survival. But these are not reasoned scientific critiques. They are like looking at the least probable option. And all of these are one of the many tools in the industry's toolbox to delay or weaken or throw, aspersions onto independent science that is really sounding the alarm, and that has been sounding the alarm on EDCs for decades. Another thing that was pointed out in the film was the wing spread statement, which was in 1991. Other things that happened in 1991, I was born. So for 32, nearly 33 years, scientists have been ringing the alarm around endocrine disrupting chemicals. There has been, if there wasn't damning research at that point in time, there certainly is now. And that was a major part as well of EPA's overhaul of the Toxic Substances Control Act to really wholesale address the issue of chemical pollution in our environment. And so, one of the really important things and ways that people can also get involved is to talk about corporate influence in science, and easily identifiable. We have things called funding statements in research studies, which are great. And so, we can kind of talk about that. We can show how research is funded by chemical industries and how that disproportionately has favorable or positive outcomes for products. So, things like Colgate Palmolive, which makes your toothpaste, funding a study on triclosan, a chemical that's used in toothpaste that's an antimicrobial that harms health. And that's that study saying that, oh no, triclosan's actually totally fine. And a lot of the research that we've done kind of looking at what's called financial conflict of interest has said, okay, if we take the same exact study that has these 5 exact things, right? 5 here and 5 here, they look the same, they sound the same, they should come out the same. And yet the study that's funded by industry has this weird X factor where it actually doesn't find the same thing, using the same exact methodology with the same exact weaknesses, looking at the same exact chemicals and the same exact outcomes. For some reason, there's an X factor here that makes this study say that actually this chemical is more protective. And what we've intuited that to be is a financial conflict of interest, which you can see the tobacco industry playbook really clearly. UCSF has an industry documents library, which I'm happy to put in the chat. That was started with the tobacco industry documents. So looking at all these documents from court cases on how the tobacco industry was undermining science and was, tinkering with methodologies or influencing science. It's come up in the sugar industry. Coca-Cola is very on top of it, taking the baton directly from the tobacco industry, and the chemical industry is doing the same. And I think that I think it's important as critical thinkers, as people who are concerned about these increasing chronic diseases that we're facing, and that we're facing at the same exact time, right? We move from 1 in 22, I think, in breast cancer to 1 in 8 or 1 in 7. Like, as you're dealing with these very personal things that are likely to affect your life if they have not affected your life already, it's important to think about where you're getting your information from and what the drive is of the person or people who are giving you such information. So, an independent scientist at a university might be funded by, the fossil fuel industry, or might be at a university with deep ties to the fossil fuel industry. University of California actually has a significant number of people on its board tied to the petrochemical industry. Like, that is something of concern that is important to kind of bar against for independent scientists like folks at PRE who are trying to critique the petrochemical industry. And also to say, what do I have to get out of giving you the information in the way that I'm giving it to you, right? My drive is, I fundamentally don't believe that we should have been experimenting on you unchecked, or that chemical industry shouldn't have been experimenting on you unchecked for your entire life and for much of the life of your parents, or my folks especially. And I just think that should stop. I think it's unjust, and I think it's unethical. And the chemical industry would say that it's eating into their, doing something about it would eat into their profit. And so, I think that for me is really critical to make sure that folks are literate in.
Yeah, thank you. I don't know if I'm having internet connectivity issues, so sorry if I'm going in and out for folks. But I think that I think you should drop in the chat your library you have of corporate things, because that really was a sentiment that we saw in this new research that we'd done too, and all of you are talking about it. It's just this need for corporate transparency. We can't make decisions, we can't consume consciously, we can't, if we don't know what we're working with there. So oh yeah, thank you. Chemical Industry Documents Library. That's awesome. Thank you. Well, I am pleased to have scientists such as yourself, or groups of folks that are working independently to help us with that. So let me move us on. We are we're getting to lots of good stuff, but I will move us on to our next round of questions. So Thalia, over to you. The film showed so many heartbreaking stories, which we've talked about: breast cancer, ADHD to infertility. So how do you help patients navigate this and educate them?
Yeah, it's really challenging because by the time I see a couple or even just single women wanting to preserve their fertility, especially for couples, they are already really stressed out. And so to then tell them about, these possible exposures and possible links to their infertility, it's a delicate subject. I don't want to impose more on them. However, they do ask me, like, what else can I do? How can I improve my chances? I'm going to do this IVF cycle. What does the literature show? What does the data show? How can I improve things? And so I do go through, we have really good evidence out of Mass General at Harvard. They had this Earth study where they recruited thousands of couples undergoing IVF. They checked levels of BPA, phthalates, and other chemicals in their urine, blood, and then they tracked their outcomes. And so, women who had higher levels of BPA and phthalates, they actually had fewer eggs retrieved, lower estrogen levels at the end of their cycle, poor egg quality, lower fertilization rates, and less good quality embryos to work with. And so, based on that, I just talk about simple lifestyle changes they can do at home. For example, get rid of everything that you're ingesting out of plastic. So throw out all that Tupperware. It's amazing. Like, people are still microwaving Tupperware, for at lunch. It's convenient. We all know it's terrible, but most people don't. So replacing with glass, their water bottles with glass or stainless steel, that old plastic bottle in your car from 2 days ago, throw it out. Especially when you combine the thermal effect with the old plastic, it really leaches it out. And then in terms of diet, so less takeout, trying to eat at home, more fresh produce. It's so crazy. Like, why do they have to put the salad in a plastic bag or a plastic box? Why can't it just be from the farm to, I don't know, a cardboard box in the supermarket? I don't know. So trying to pick things like that, avoiding canned items. The lining of cans has a very high concentration of BPA. There was like this famous story of a research study. They randomized kids to Chef Boyardee canned soup or not, and they checked levels of BPA in their urine. And it was so high in the kids having the canned soup, they called the CDC that checked the urine, called the researchers and said, what are these kids eating? You need to stop this study now. They're highest level we've ever seen. And that is on the shelf in the supermarket, like today. So I just think awareness is power, and then making these choices. And like, it's not like you're going to eliminate everything, but BPA has a half-life of like 6 hours. Phthalates is like 12 to 24 hours. You can eliminate these things from your body. And we know from interventional studies that urine, after making these changes for several days, were like 50% lower. So that's kind of how I counsel. Also with recurrent pregnancy loss, it's another known association with these chemicals. So those couples as well, we talk about, especially when all their testing is normal, that's really frustrating. And so, so we talked about, like produce, food utensils, products, and then little things like you're trying to get pregnant. Maybe it's not the best time to buy a new car, right? That new car smell, that is all phthalates. Everyone knows what I'm talking about. Some people like love that smell. It's terrible. So, you just had a baby, also not a good time, right? You have this newborn, lots of neurodevelopmental changes happening in their body, their endocrine system. So those are kinds of the things that how I live my life ever since I've learned about all of this. With my first pregnancy, I had no idea. I often wonder, I hope my 5-year-old is going to turn out okay. My 2 and 7-month-old, I already knew all of this and had a lot of these changes incorporated. So
yeah, I'm glad we can provide some of that, just day-to-day things people can do, make changes in their lives. I am one of those, having been in the waste industry for so long, it just kills me to throw away a Tupperware. I mean, I am that person. So I just need to not bring it into my home, because then I will not want to reuse it. But it is really hard to not want to reuse it. All right, over to you, Yvette. I am really excited for you to talk to us about this. So we've all kind of said the film didn't quite leave us with much hope. So I was hoping you could share with us a success story, but I know one of the things that you're mostly involved in right now is this global plastics treaty. And so that's bringing me hope, definitely on a global level. It can address some of these corporate issues. And I'm hoping you can maybe mention reuse and really plug that for us also.
Thanks, Kelly, for that question. Okay, people, you should start getting to reuse your things. Even when it comes to the textile industry, oftentimes we go for what's cheap and accessible because we want that shirt or those pants. And often we look past, thrift stores. I know in our communities, it's something that's very embraced because it's a low-income community. Those are the options that we have. And sometimes the options that low-income communities are driven to can either be very helpful or very harmful. And sometimes the reason why people don't want to do things like reuse is because it makes them look bad. And by that, it's coded, right? It makes them look poor. And they don't want to look poor, if anything else. Or we get shuffled over to dollar stores in order to purchase food and things like that. I'm guilty of it. I purchased a cereal from the 99-cent store because it was $2.99. So how is it that we bring these conversations and intersection into the conversation when it comes to conversations around, raising the minimum wage, basic universal income, access to healthcare, reproductive rights? How do we tie all these different service workers industry who are, again, disproportionately exposed to different kinds of chemicals because we are the ones that are in those service positions? I'm glad also that you brought up the Global Plastics Treaty, because I do want to share this with you. I'm going to drop a link right now, and this link it's going to take you to something called an options document. This document is the basis for the Global Plastics Treaty, and in it has about 12 or 13 options within the first couple of pages. The Global Plastics Treaty is something that gets overlooked by people because they're like, oh, it's a UN document, it's a UN treaty, it's not going to affect me or my life. Let me stop you there and tell you that's the wrong mindset, because all of these feelings and emotions that our government isn't holding industry accountable is because who is going to hold our government accountable? And if we set a global legally binding treaty with a scope and obligations document that represents our concerns, then we can actually move on holding the United States accountable, including the State Department that is actually holding the most power in these negotiations. And I want to bring this conversation back to something Swati said, because in the Global Plastics Treaty process, we are now in on the third global conversation. There have been 2 in the past. I want you to help us make some noise with the State Department and Jose Fernandez, who's at the head of it, because what we see is the US delegation being very chummy with the Nestle's and the Reynolds of the world, because they understand that capitalism is what drives our country and profit. And sometimes it's so embedded in our government that it's hard to start identifying what is helpful and what is actually harmful. As you look through that document, I want you to pay attention to actually 3 core obligations. One is the obligation number 1, which is tackling the phase out and reducing the supply and demand for use of primary plastic polymers. We're talking about controlling the problem, not managing it. We're talking about setting caps for production that help us not only tackle the global plastics crisis, and in turn, really get to the core of what is disrupting our fertility, what is disproportionately harming women in our communities, but also maintaining that goal of 1.5 degrees Celsius before we reach climate collapse. The second obligation I want to point out to you is obligation 2 and 3, because these have to do with the conversation. These have to do with toxics. Obligation 2 is about banning, phasing out, reducing the use of problematic and avoidable plastics. We're not talking about medically necessary plastics, and that's what the industry wants to consistently point to. What is, helping someone who needs an artificial limb to walk or run or grab things? We're not talking about those. We're talking about, what's in my clean and clear microplastic, facial wash that's going to get thrown away and enter the environment. We're talking about the straws and the sachet ketchup and hot sauce packets that get dumped into your fast food bags without your consent that you're going to end up throwing away anyway. That obligation is about setting criteria. What are the plastics that are harmful? What are the plastics that folks like Dr. Thalia and Swati and folks at CBD have identified? Controlling the import and export of those plastics, because yes, we could be doing a phenomenal job here, but if we're importing problematic plastics, then we're not solving that problem. And if we're exporting toxic waste to other less fortunate countries in the global south, and creating a global plastic crisis that is suffocating their food systems and increasing the amount of incinerators, then we're actually just shuffling the problem along. Obligation 2 is also about tracking and transparency, because so much of the information we want to get our hands on, what are the toxic additives in there, is actually confidential business information. And we need to know this. We can no longer shield. We do not have the privilege of shielding multinational corporations from the effects of the public getting our hands on the information we need to protect ourselves and our families. And the tracking of these plastics, right? There is going to be a black market for every single industry. That does not exclude the plastics industry. So what are the products that are being sold on Temu and on Shein and on Amazon that are avoiding those kinds of measures because nobody's actually watching? And then obligation 3, which is the banning and phasing out and reducing the production and consumption of chemicals and polymers of concern. Now, this obligation has to do with the production, import, and export, tracking the volumes of those, because currently we don't know how much plastic is in the world. We don't know how many of these toxic products are entering the environment or store shelves. We need to know and understand what the types are. So much robust information on toxics has entered because of research communities. Let's get that all globbed together and put it on a database and tell countries that don't have access to that kind of research, hey, here's the list, and require health evaluations for the kind of products and chemicals that are added into plastics, because some of those actually never even get to see EPA eyes before they hit the shelves. And they have exemptions for so many of these plastic products. So let's get rid of the business secrets, get rid of the trade secrets, and we need you to make noise to folks like Jose Fernandez at the State Department and the State Department in general, and say, hey, these we want in here, because what the US is currently doing is not only undermining our concerns, they're saying this is not a global problem. We need to handle this domestically at home. If you could have, you would have, but you didn't. And it's time to get your little hand slapped and time to get somebody who's actually responsible on top of you to do it. It's not the first time. We're going to have at least 2 more treaty conversations on this topic. Again, like what Swati said, they think that the general public has no say-so, that we have no idea. And I hope that folks who are on this webinar do get a chance to review that UNEP document. And hey, if your lane isn't toxics, but it's waste, there are points about waste in there. If your piece is on policies and implementation of positive policies, that piece is in that document. So give it a review, and any concern that you have, please uplift those to the State Department, whether it's on Twitter, whether it's an email, or however you want to get engaged. I'm going to drop a couple of useful Twitter accounts to follow. If you want, more follow-up information, follow us at Fenceline Watch on Twitter and use the hashtag Global Plastics Treaty in any of your posts to get this uplifted.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh my gosh, that was wonderful. And I am going to share a link. The center actually has an action alert around the Global Plastics Treaty. So you're going to get that in the follow-up email, but we'll also put it, with all of Yvette's great things that she's sharing here in the chat too. So I know we're almost at time, folks. And I was going to have Swati answer one more question, maybe related to advocacy, but I know that we actually have some questions in the Q&A too. So I'm going to ask for a favor here. I know, Yvette, you can probably answer the biodegradable plastics question. Do you mind answering that in the Q&A part? And Thalia, I think you can probably answer the, there was a question, I think it's here, or did you already answer it about the canned goods? Thank you so much. Awesome. All right, Swati, in the next minute, can you give us, the one thing about the film was it was based in Europe. And so I'm hoping you can give us a perspective about a little bit more of an advocacy. We just heard about the Global Plastics Treaty, but I know that is your area of expertise. And then we'll wrap up soon after that, folks. So sorry to keep you late.
Yes, totally. So at PRE, all we do pretty much is advocacy for scientists and academics and clinicians and other folks like that. There's a number of things that you can do. So first of all, last week, there was a House Energy and Commerce hearing on critical materials, which is a subcommittee in that House Energy and Commerce hearing. There's like a large gap in the middle because they were also voting on Speaker of the House. So just like scrub past that. But my executive director, Tracy Woodruff, gave comment at that hearing. Tracy was not only the only woman on the panel, the only person on the panel with expertise in chemicals, she was the only non-industry person on the panel. And I want you to listen to that hearing, and I want you to listen to what the American Chemistry Council and Huntsman Chemicals are saying about the justification for creating these things that are destroying your health and your communities and your environment without your consent. Like, And I want you to also keep in mind, because I hate myself, so I was doing this during the panel. I looked up the salaries of every single person on the panel, obviously besides Tracy, but she's a public employee. She makes I think she makes around 158,000. I'm not really sure, but everybody on the panel, minimum 1.5 million in annual salary alone. And what they are complaining about on this panel is any level of chemical regulation of new chemicals that they say are, preventing essential chemistries or preventing progress in this world. And they're whistleblowing about things like, oh, if we don't use ethylene oxide, a chemical that is a hazardous air pollutant, which has been linked to breast cancer, which is disproportionately found in communities of color, if we don't use that, we'll make medical plastics and they will yellow. Oh no, like just that they will yellow, right? Or that as if there are not existing alternatives for ethylene oxide that the medical industry and many other industries can use. So on Yvette's point, confidential business information under the Toxic Substances Control Act is not allowed to apply to health and safety data. And the chemical industry continues to try to find ways to undermine that. Natural Resources Defense Council, which folks might be familiar with, is doing a lot on chemical recycling, which is just the fancy new term the chemical industry is using for incineration. I happen to be in North Carolina right now, 2 counties over from Warren County and 1 county over from the Braven Chemical Recycling Facility. That is one of 7 major chemical recycling facilities. So I'm really inside of it right now. But I want you to know that, like, in the same way that we've been seeing a lot of political advocacy to legislators in recent weeks, your legislators are incredibly fickle, and the entire legislative process is a massive popularity contest. If you have a legislator that's on that critical materials committee, you can register your dissent with them as their constituent. They should listen to you. You elected them in. They are supposed to represent you. Similarly, go find your representatives, go find the committees that they're sitting on, and go make your voice heard. You do not have to be the most politically astute or, moneyed or lettered person to make your voice heard with your representatives. And if you don't feel comfortable doing that as an individual and being angry by yourself, which is totally understandable, go find a local organization or a national organization. Sierra Club has a ton of local chapters. They do a lot on chemicals and health. Center for Biological Diversity, of course, is one of them. Safer Chemicals, Healthy Families, local organizations like Toxic Free North Carolina, which is a part of, I think, the larger Toxic Free group. All have folks who are staffed who are working night and day on these issues. And so if you can't get it, if you don't want to get involved yourself, which is really scary and totally understandable, go find other people. Kelly probably knows a ton of them. I know a ton of them. We're all happy to talk to you about ways that you can get involved. So yeah, that's my pitch.
Thank you. Thank you so much for bringing that back to the advocacy that we can do. So I am going to, I think we're getting to your questions here, either in the chat. So thank you all so much for this. Barb, I'm hoping Yvette answered some of your questions as we, it looks like they're working on it right now. And Julie, I want to touch on your question here. So we had a professor on last week. I don't know if you were on last week, but Dr. Tyrone Hayes has done work around this idea of transgender and these endocrine disrupting chemicals. And his response to me when I asked him about this when we were prepping was the science just isn't there. There isn't research to say that it is impacting it in that way. And I don't know. Thanks, Swati. Take care. And I don't know if anybody else wants to chime in there, but I didn't want to not address it. So anyway, I just want to say thank you so much to all of our panelists. You are going to get a great big email from us next week. And it's going to include all of the resources that we've provided to you, the action alert about the Global Plastics Treaty. There's also another one that I was going to share, the No PFAS in Cosmetics Act, which is really applicable to this also. So you'll get the recording, a certificate to various credentialing bodies, and ways to take action. You will get an evaluation when we close this out. So please take that. And I know, Kim, I'm probably messing you up in the chat, but I will just put most of that in the follow-up email. I didn't want to keep people too much longer. So thank you all again for hanging in there, and thank you to our panelists. It was just fabulous, and I really appreciate it. I hope we all work together again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.